Hey there from Bugeye guys. Here's a nice Bugeye, and we're gonna get into this baby and talk a little about choke operation. This is a key issue for clients we've found, and we wanna just make a very thorough video about how to operate this important control, because when your Bugeye is cold, you need to enrich in the mixture in order to start it. And this is where the problem lies. The first portion of the operation is high idle from here to here, and the second portion of operation is enriching. And if you only pull it this far, thinking you don't want to break it, then you're never going to get the jets to drop and the mixture to richen, and the car often won't start. So you got to get that extra bit of enriching in order to make the choke actually function. Otherwise, all you're doing in this zone is raising the idle. So we're going to go now to a video and discuss the actual carburetor linkages so you can learn how that all works. But I thought we'd start in the cockpit so you could see proper operation here. Another thing about these knobs, this is the original S knob. The choke knob would match, and we sell that product. This is a bad reproduction that's on the market, pretty ugly. But that's irrelevant for our video right now. It's just about how much do you pull this out. And no matter what knob style you have, there are a bunch of other ones out there. They all work the same, high idle and then enrich. And I will just put in one plug for the T-handle version that we sell. That unit is infinitely lockable. You pull it out and twist. So it starts to be too rich all the way out here. You can go halfway and twist. Now you have too much high idle. You can go in the rest of the way and twist to lock it. These are all friction only, and they don't tend to stay put. So the T-handle is a nice way to go. Anyway, let's go under the hood now, or to the carburetors themselves, so you can see how this mechanism actually works. And let's take a look at these carburetors, because we've had some carburetor questions this week, and I wanted to do a really detailed video about very specifically this choke issue, which keeps recurring. These are HS2 carburetors. This is a brand new set which we sell, and it's a serious commercial because these things are so superior to everything you see in the field, and I highly recommend that you investigate this option. It's a brand new set of HS2 carburetors. What you mainly find on Bugeyes is this is the H1 carburetor, and these are generally worn at every single moving part, and that's what makes this such a great upgrade. You go from 1 1/4 inch throat on the HS2. This would be an 1 1/8 inch throat. Tiny little intake versus a slightly bigger tiny little intake, and it makes a big difference. We just put a brand new pair of these on a Morris Minor, and it really woke up the car beautifully. Of course, that was a single carb car. We went to 2 plus brand new ones, and it's just, it really runs superbly. So if you have any Sprite, Midget, Morris Minor, anything that uses an 1 1/4 inch carb, this is a new set. If you have an H1 on anything, an old Austin or whatever, this would be your go-to set. And I just wanted to make that really clear. Now, the reason why we want to do this video is not just about the working pieces in general, but it's specifically about the choke. Because if you're new to this world, manual choke operation seems to really trip new owners up. And many of our customers have called us trying to better understand choke operation. I wanted to really break it down for you in this video. So on an HS2, and we'll go to the H1s in a minute and have a similar look, you have the throttle actuation right here. And this is basically moving butterfly 1 and butterfly 2. Which you can, yeah, it's hard to see with the manifold in the way, but there is the butterfly all the way in there. That gold disc. I don't know if you can see it. There it is, angled just a little more. There. That flashing gold thing is the butterfly. So when you move this linkage right here, the cable is pulling butterfly A and butterfly B up to move the 2 carburetors. And that's where synchronizing the carburetors makes a big difference, is because you want each of them to pull evenly. And that's got to be set correctly. So that's the throttle side of this. But the choke piece is where the issue arises. And the way that this choke works is kind of interesting. The first portion of its travel, the cable would be hooked up here on one of these sides, and it's pulling the choke upward, the linkage upward. And the first portion is high idle only, and the second portion is enrichening only. Well, you do get additional high idle. So it's high idle and enrichening. And the key thing is sometimes people pull the choke this far and they wonder why the car doesn't start. The reason is that you don't get the enrichment unless you pull it this second portion. So high idle here, enrichment here. And what you're looking at here is the actual carburetor jet coming downward. And what that allows is the needle to less, it's a tapered needle, so there's less obstruction. And with this lower, you're effectively enriching the mixture. That's why turning this screw downward would move the jet downward and enriching the mixture. But you don't need to worry about that now. It's just for the choke. This is rich, this is less rich. And if you don't get your carburetors to do this when it's 25 degrees outside, and you haven't run your car in a month, it's gonna likely crank for a long time before it starts and maybe kill the battery in the process. So by enriching the mixture, you can usually get the cars to start very promptly in this position, okay? So the key distinction once again is a little bit of pull for high idle, a little more pull for enrichment. Now let's come over here to the H1. The H1, one other big reason why we're so hot on these HS2 conversions and why we sell a lot of the brand new ones is this H1 design, which was used, well, it was, let's talk about Bugeye specifically. This was the Bugeye carburetor. If you look at 501, this is the carb set that we restored and used. But these are really harder to work with. They're more difficult for maintenance. They're more complicated in terms of getting them just right. The way the jet seals are packed with cork, it's much more fussy. This has also a jet that will come down. It's a little different design, but the pivots are all generally worn out, and the choke mechanism is usually full of lost motion. You can see somewhere right here. And as a result, you just have a somewhat sloppy actuation of the choke assembly. So in the case of this setup, this is just removed from a car that got brand new HS2s. When you pull the butterflies on this assembly, it actuates here. And this little tab is your high idle from the choke operation. So when the choke moves, I'm pulling the choke here with my fingers, and you see how this butterfly assembly is moving. You should be able to see it there. See it moving up as I pull the choke. So as this goes up, you get high idle. So in the same, just like on the HS2, as these go upward, it's moving this throttle assembly and simultaneously lowering these little brass tubes out of the carburetor body. And that's where the enriching is. So the first portion would be high idle, and the second portion would be enriching. So if you're pulling your choke insufficiently and it doesn't start, it's often the case that you're not getting this deployment. And if you can get a helper to pull the choke for you while you watch, you should be able to see this on your H1 or see this on your H2. And that's how you know you've pulled it far enough, if you can verify it by looking under the hood. I hope that helps you a great deal. That's a critical area. This is the other thing about the H1s that's kind of cute and annoying at the same time, is that this is where the choke pulls from this little stirrup. The cable actually goes through here with a stop, and that's how they designed it. It does work, but it's much more efficient here to actuate that with this linkage. It's much cleaner, it's much more trouble-free, it's much more consistent, and when you need it, it generally works on these, and on these they're usually, as I said, all worn out. If you're unclear about which carburetor you have, the H1 carburetor, well, now that you better understand this choke linkage, that will help you. But just from the top, the H1 has a single Whitworth screw here for the overflow and the float bowl top. And the HS2 carburetor has 3 screws. So you can immediately identify the difference between the two from the float bowl. You see this is a flatter float bowl and this is curved. This is another HS2 assembly, but it happens to be fit with the original Bugeye air filters. which is not something we recommend because you actually have to damage the body to fit that bolt in there, and they're really a pain to turn those hex heads when you do this. The better setup is to use the K&N filters that we sell for these HS2s. You also get much better filtration. But once again, on these carburetors, which is another used set, first high idle, and then you can see the jets deploy, and that's where the richness comes in. And Bodie and I will wrap this up here in Bugeye 501, the very first production Bugeye, where you can see that original profile of the C knob. That's the original type. Here's the original S knob for the starter motor to match it. And again, as we've discussed, you have high idle in this portion and enriched mixture in this portion. So your total movement is roughly 1 3/8 inches, and the total movement for high idle is roughly 3/4 of an inch. So you just want to make sure you're familiar with that distinction from high idle to enrich, and that you don't pull it so hard that you break it, but you pull it hard enough to richen the mixture and start your car on a cold day. And that's what we have this week here from Bugeye Guys.